Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to Home Education Matters, and today it is another of our bite-sized chunks with Jo Moorcroft. And Jo Moorcroft is a dog behaviourist and has studied dog psychology. And we are going to be looking at how dog behaviourism collides with parenting in the best ways. So what can we learn from dog behaviourism and dog psychology that also can be applied nicely to building your relationship with your home ed child and generally parenting? Because parenting from a home ed perspective, obviously, they're exactly the same kind of approach. It's just when you home ed, your parenting never stops because you can't send your child off to school or don't send your child off to school. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of play. Now, I did a fabulous podcast with Naomi Fisher, and she is very much, she's a clinical psychologist and works in the home ed community because she obviously is a home educator and works outside the home ed community as well. And she is massive on the importance of play, and particularly on the importance of play as your children get older, because it's something that often we find we consider play to be super important when our child is maybe early years or possibly even key stage 1. But once they get to about age 9, I think a lot of parents think that children shouldn't be playing so much, or maybe, it's a lesser priority. Come on, let's do your schoolwork, or let's do your lessons, or let's do this, let's do that. And play becomes a little bit relegated. And as a parent of teenagers, I can tell you that I still prioritize play massively in our household and still think that it's very important. And I know that also as a parent of a puppy, that play is vital. In actual fact, the training that I do with my puppy is completely play-based. And for about 3 months when I got her, I didn't take her for any walks. I just played with her. So I played with her in the house, I played with her in the garden, then I played with her out on the fields and out on the paths. And my training with her was super play-based. And it was all about building up relationship and just building up her kind of slightly dyspraxic approach to her own body, because she's a very big dog. So for anyone who hasn't tuned in for our previous podcast with Jo, please tell us I'm going to challenge you now, because the last one was 2 sentences. So yes, that's right. I want you to tell us in 1 sentence a little bit about yourself, and then tell us about the importance of play when it comes to dog behaviourism and parenting, in fact.
Yeah, lovely. So hi everyone, I'm Jo, and I am a dog behaviourist, also going down the home education route with my 2 young boys who are 2 and soon to be 4.
Well done. 1 sentence.
Oh no,
congratulations.
So yeah, actually what you were saying there was really interesting, because focusing on play in early childhood and then it kind of dwindling out as the children grow older is exactly what I see in the dog world. Everyone tends to go really hard at it for puppy, and then kind of once puppy starts to lose its puppy looks around that 6 to 8 month mark, everything dwindles off and they're in this really strict routine of just, and this is a massive generalization, but typically walk of a morning, come back, sleep, have a bit of food, possibly a walk midday, or not, possibly a walk of an evening. That's about it. That's pretty much what generalizing majority of dogs' lives look like. And I think it's very similar for children as well. It kind of dies out after the young age, but the importance of play goes well into adulthood, well into both in dogs and in humans. And if anything, I really stress the importance of it with oh, excuse me, frog in my throat. I really stress the importance of it with my dog families as they've got older dogs, and my dogs kind of fall into that category now, as sad as it makes me feel, because they're still my puppies, but they're 7 and 9. And if I don't keep their brains engaged in everything, it would be very easy for them to fall into that category I mentioned a moment ago of just we end up existing together and we're not really doing anything. So yeah, that play bit is just so important to keep them young, to keep their mind active, and you might actually get a few extra years out of your dog if you keep playing with them, because it keeps them young and fresh. So yeah, it's super important.
When I know when my puppy was about a year and a half, I took her to the beach and I left my daughter up on the sand dunes, sort of thinking about contemplating the existence of the universe or whatever teenagers think about, which I'm pretty sure that's what they think about actually. and and when I was out on the beach, and there were lots of other people with dogs on the beach, but it wasn't particularly busy. It's a big beach. But I went back and we walked a long way, myself and my dog, but I could always see my daughter in the distance on the sand dunes. And when I went back, my daughter said, I always know which one is you because you're the only one interacting with the dog. Everyone else is just throwing the ball, throwing the ball, throwing the ball. And she said, you're always like talking to the dog or playing games with the dog or running around with the dog. Honestly, I look like a total nutter because I'm constantly playing games with the dog when I'm out and about, because otherwise I find it kind of boring. I find it unenjoyable. And it's a little bit the same with parenting. I know that sometimes when I tell people I home educate, particularly when the children were younger, I would often get the response, well, you must get really bored. You must find that like really boring. You must get really bored and just like sitting at home with them. And I always say, and I've always said, and I always continue to say, if you're bored, you're doing it wrong because there's never a reason to be bored when you're at home with your children, because they're a constant source of difference. I wouldn't say entertainment, but there's always something different. They're always bringing something different, just like every human and every interaction with every human, and actually every dog as well, brings something different all the time because it's another sentient being, as you say, bringing something else to the table. And my children and I did a lot of play when they were younger. And then what happened was, as they got to 6 or 7, they started playing together, and I just kind of backed out of the play and then watch them play. And I was perfectly happy with that because, that was a dynamic that worked very well for us. And even now, I found that as they got to their teens, they play occasionally with me when it's board games or things like that. And actually, sometimes we do imaginary play together. They play with each other, but also they play on their own. So they play computer games and things like that. And, when you're talking about adults and how it's important all the way through to adulthood that you play, it occurred to me that I remember when iPads, I'm so old, I remember when iPads came out and they had and like games on phones, and people were playing games, and it was a new thing. It wasn't something that we had really done before. And if you look now at how people interact with their phones, apart from social media, people are on Xboxes playing games. I'm talking adults here. Xboxes playing games. They're on like Candy Crush. They're basically playing games because it's part of our human nature, isn't it, to want to play games? And children are no different to adults. They want to engage with the world in a playful way.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's keeping that mind fresh again, and it actually fires up parts of the brain that allows you to have that creativity. I think we are all naturally, well, probably not even naturally, very unnaturally, it's stripped out of us to go, well, that's not what you do anymore. You need to sit down and you need to do this. And for me, that's one of, it's one of the factors that's made me choose to go down the home ed route, because I love watching my boys play. And I never grew up with boys. I've got a sister, so having boys was a whole big like, whoa, what's going on here? And I've done a lot of research into the boy psychology and boys' brains, and very into Maggie Dent at the moment, really liking her stuff on boys. And again, it's all this play stuff, and seeing how much it can naturally just translate into everyday life, and it gives you those skills. And that's, you mentioned earlier that you were doing loads of game-based stuff with your dog, and that's exactly it, because you can layer up skills through fun. It doesn't have to be sit there, do this, march around. It's like, no, you can have all of these basic obedience stuff from the dog point of view through games, and it's much more enjoyable. And then that kind of ties in with our previous podcast on relationship, because everything interlinks beautifully by topping up your credit in that account to go, let's do something, let's have fun, and enjoy each other's company.
That's true. And there's no doubt that play encourages bonding with your dog, with your children, with your husband, with your mother. I mean, it's, it just does, right? But, this is why, there's that sort of tradition of people play charades at Christmas and things like that, because it's a bonding thing. It's a nice sort of fun bonding thing. And I think one thing you said there was really important, which is that my puppy learned a lot through playing games. As I say, we didn't really do training as such. We trained through games. So I taught her to walk on one side. I taught her to walk on the other. I taught her middle, which is hilarious because I'm quite short and she's a very large dog. But even now she adores middle. She loves it and it's her safe space. But she learned the skill of going into middle, which is when they go in between your legs. Now, sometimes if we encounter a small dog that comes running towards us and the owner doesn't think they should bother calling it back, because my dog is massive and their dog is small, and my dog does not like that, and so I bring her into a middle and she's now then safe in a middle, and I'm able to get my hand on her harness in case she wants to go and say hello to the little dog, which of course would then get lots of tutting from everyone else around us. So she learned the skill of being in middle through play. And it's exactly the same, I think, with children. My children have learned so many skills, not just life skills, although that's not to be sniffed at, things like collaboration, communication skills, things like that. But they've actually learned, in inverted commas, educational skills. Maths is a classic. We have a lot of maths games. We've done a lot of maths learning through games. We used to play a dice game where, like all children, they were slightly reticent to write. I mean, all children go through that stage when they're about 5 or 6 or 7, maybe. They just don't like putting pen to paper anymore. It's like something they seem to stop liking. And so we would get a 12-sided dice, which I think is from Dungeons and Dragons, which is another podcast I've done, which is a classic example of how gaming continues all the way through our lives. But we would get a 12-sided dice, we would throw it, and if you got a 3, you would have to write 3 words down of the story. Then the next person would throw, they would have to write whatever number words came up for them. And so you get this idea, a little bit like, do you remember you used to have, you'd draw a start, somebody's head, and then you'd fold it over and they'd have to draw the middle, and you end up with a weird looking creature. It's a bit like that with writing. So it's a very good game, and it gets them, you wouldn't be amazed how much they write in the space of half an hour by not realizing they're writing and they're enjoying it. And that is exactly what I mean by play-based learning. There is so much learning to be had when it comes to playing. And it's such a shame, I think, that we don't incorporate it more as the children get older. And of course, in schools, they actually have designated playtime, which seems insane to me, that it's like, ding, ding, now it's playtime. Ding, ding, now you're not allowed to play.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, I try and cast my my brain back to school days, and that playground was it's a strange place. You kind of
stressful, right? Stressful.
All of these different social groups, and for me, I don't think anybody prepares you for the skills you need to cope in school. It's very much academic focus. And again, it's my own personal opinion. I don't know if I mentioned before, but my sister's actually a secondary school teacher. So we are polar opposites when it comes to our parenting styles. But yeah, for me, I always look at the skills that are needed. And I want to do that through, we do it through play. So my boys, for the ages they are, like I say, they're 2 and soon to be 4. So technically he's still 3. The play I see them have, okay, yeah, they have their squabbles, that's to be expected. But percentage-wise, I think that's still pretty small. And I will look to it, kind of like we mentioned on the last one. I can see the underlying root cause of it, whether it's tiredness or overexcitement or whatever it may be. There's an underlying emotion that causes the spillover. But for the most part, they play beautifully together. And for me, I try to guide them through the skills that I'm seeing them use, so that because they're both in like a forest school education provider, I'm very fortunate to have, because they also offer flexi schooling, which is going to be a lifesaver for me with my own business. But when adults start to point out things like, oh, you're not listening, or they're saying that these children are either missing skills or they're saying this, our children will be aware of they're being talked about. But if we're not talking to them about those skills, then for me, that's where I think it's really important to go, yeah, actually, we need to label what you're doing really well at to fit into society. And I know that's a whole other conversation of, you technically, I don't know, arguably you could be going, oh, well, you're leading them into behaving a certain way and yada, yada. But realistically, we all have to abide by certain societal things. There's manners to a degree. And I don't mean like the please and thank yous. It's just how to engage with society. So things like sharing, I don't force my children to share, but if I see them do it, I'll be like, that is awesome sharing. Like that's what you've done. I haven't told you to do it, but I'll label it and go, that's what that is. If they've listened really well, I'll go like, awesome listening, like, well done. Get those things on the side of your head, their ears. That's what you've just used to listen to me with. That's pretty cool. And things like, but you're putting those communication skills in and you explain them. So I like to take my boys out to coffee shops and stuff like that. So we're just, I can grab a coffee, we can sit there, just soak up what's going on. But you need those skills of actually, right, we need to sit still for a little bit. We need to learn to wait. If anything, actually, we went on our first abroad holiday a couple of weeks ago. And I approached it like I would do a training plan for a dog. So about 9 months prior to that, we used to go up to the airport and we would do regular visits to the airport and we would increase the duration and the experience whilst we were there each time. So they got used to the environment. They got used to seeing there's only so far you can go in the airport without your boarding pass and everything, but you could go in and see where all the luggage and the queues were and all of that. And we spent a lot of time just going up and down and giving them the skill going there, but we were doing it through play. It was an exciting adventure day out. We took their friends up and they were playing whilst watching the planes go off. And then we kept talking about and creating situations through play to give them the skill to learn to wait and have patience, because there's a lot of waiting around in an airport and sitting still on a plane. So by talking about it and identifying all of those skills, that holiday couldn't have gone any better. I was so proud of them that I think the majority of other parents, they have that struggle with the children going like, it's like half term as well. So, your typical environment. And I was so lucky. Well, not even lucky. I put the work in. That we sat there and we were prepared. We had snacks. We had all this stuff, and we was like, right, what skills do we need to cope at the airport, boys? And Clay, my eldest, would go, waiting. We need to learn to wait. And I was like, yes, well done. And what skills have we used here? And we're able to label them and get through. And for me, I just think it's something we need to be helping our children with a lot more than, in my personal opinion, focusing on some of the academic stuff. Because that can come. Education's there for life. I'm doing a degree now. I didn't do it in the normal trajectory, but I'm doing it now because it's lifelong and it's amazing and I love studying. I just don't think it's needed in the school setting for as it is, which is why we're all listening to this lovely home ed podcast.
These kind of strict parameters that are put on learning, where this is where you learn, this is when you learn, and it's so artificial, isn't it? And I think what you were saying there about exposing your children to the airport, as a kind of world schooler or somebody that world schooled for years, I am really impressed that you put that effort in. I just hauled my get your ass on the plane kind of thing. But I think what you're saying there, yes, you really were going there, weren't you? But I think one thing that I'm getting from that is that the effort that you put in when it comes to parenting is the reward that you get out. And you said there that you were lucky, and then you kind of sort of rephrase that and recognize that actually it was your effort that you put in. A lot of people compliment me on my children, and a lot of people before they became teenagers. When they're teenagers, nobody compliments you anymore. But when they were younger and they were very well behaved, I would get lots of compliments. And I would often say, oh, thanks. Yeah, they have their bad days, or, oh, it's not always like this. And then I stopped myself doing that because I realized that actually I was really denigrating the effort that I put in. And I would actually say, oh, thanks, we've worked very hard on this, or thanks, I put a lot of effort in. And because it does take effort. And I think the more we kind of chalk up the good times to luck, it means that we're not allowing that feedback loop. It's like we're stopping that that positive feedback loop, and we're sort of putting in luck and we're taking out our input. And I think it's very important that we keep that link, so we know, look, this is my input and this is what I get. And on a complete aside, it did amuse me that you're taking your children to coffee shops, because I've been doing that with my puppy for the last year and a half that I've had her. Every time I go to a coffee shop, I take her with me. And my children think I'm mad, but I'm like, no, I'm taking her with me. And they're like, what does she get from it? I'm like, she gets lots of new experiences, and she learns she needs to sit down while I have my cup of coffee. And now she is impeccably behaved. Wherever we are, she knows that, oh, okay, we're sitting down. She's going to drink out of this big white thing and like look very happy. And I'm just going to lie at her feet and wait to get thrown the odd dry sprat. And we're both happy. She's learned the rules, just like your children have learned the rules of coffee shops. And I think we're drifting off play. However, and I do think that when it comes to learning, you can make it enjoyable, and it's okay. Sometimes we think, well, if it's enjoyable, it's not really education or it's not really learning. Yeah, it really is. And it's worth remembering that when you're doing your LA reports and stuff, because it all counts. It all counts as education.
God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was in a town centre the weekend. They were doing like a little jazz festival. And there are a lot of children similar age to mine with the like the walking reins on. So for all intents and purposes, they've got a lead on their child. I personally haven't gone down that route, but we've done games with them. So I had my niece with me as well, who's only 3 months younger than Clay. So, 2 3-year-olds and a 2-year-old. And they're all walking around off lead and doing it as a game. So if they got too far, I was like, red light, stop, and they're like hee, and they stop, and they loved it. And then we'd got on this bus, and linking it back in with what I was just saying about labeling those skills, we then got off the bus, and I could just see everybody looking at me going, oh my goodness me, she's got like the double buggy, she's got 3 very young children, how on earth is she going to cope in this very busy jazz festival? And I corralled the children into like a little group, and I was like, right, what skill do you need to use now? Because I'm going to talk to you. And they all pointed to their ears and went, listening. I was like, brilliant. Right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a lovely little game, and we're going to try and navigate through all of this stuff. But I need you to use that listening skill, that when I say stop or red light, you stop. And we did a few practice runs. And then they were just having a whale of a time, but it meant we could go through. They could be, air quote, off lead. It's great. It's all about that relationship, but through play.
But it's important skills as well, because it enabled you not to lose any children, that they didn't run into the road and things like that. And they learned that through play without even realizing that they were learning really important skills. And I think that is something that is so vital, and that transfers so nicely actually from dog behaviorism to parenting.
It's one of those so another skill in play which I use a lot with dogs is proximity, and I think you would have used a lot of proximity because I know who you've been training with, because I'm actually one of their trainers as well.
We can name them, it's okay.
Okay, well, yeah, so I'm one of the pro dog trainers through the Absolute Dogs module, and yeah, so all of that is very much games based. And the proximity side of it, so for me in my day-to-day work with dogs, I don't typically teach a recall, because I look at it from a relationship point of view and go, well, if I've got a really good relationship, then my dog's not going to want to wander too far from me. And I genuinely believe that's the same with the children as well, which is why I've never had to panic that they're off lead because the relationship's there. We put lots of play in. They constantly want to be hearing what I'm saying. So from that dog point of view on a recall, which is the equivalent of walking through a busy town centre with your young children off lead, it's, if you've got that relationship and you've done it through topping that up with play, because that's the best way, then you don't have to worry about the come here, get back here, regardless whether that's a child or dog, because they're not going to wander very far anyway.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And in actual fact, I have done lots of proximity work with my hound. And to be fair, she is a kind of Velcro dog, so she does like to be close. But for example, we have a very large garden at the moment, and it's not fenced off or anything. Now I'm in here right now with you recording the podcast. She's outside in the garden. I don't think she's going to run off. We got cows, we got rabbits. She's not going to run off because she wants to be close. And when I go out, I call her name. She comes straight away because she wants to be close. And it's exactly the same with my children. In actual fact, I don't know if any of our listeners have heard of the continuum concept, which is a book that was written in the 70s, I think, which is has a lot of very, very interesting parenting ideas, particularly for very young children. But one of them is the idea that if you keep your child close, it enables them to feel secure enough to go away, if you see what I mean. And a lot of people, I think, when they start home educating, they think, oh, it's a bit suffocating for the child, and like it's not good for children to have all their time with their parent. And actually, it's the opposite of that. You're allowing them the space and freedom to be away from you by having them close to you so that they always know they can be close to you. And particularly for a child who's been traumatized at school or has had a difficult experience at school, it's a very healing thing to be able to spend time with your parent in that way, and then to know that you're safe, and you're safe to be able to then go off at a distance. Okay, so we've looked at play, and we're going to be, both Jo and I are going to be giving you our top tip on using play when it comes to parenting. But I just wanted to let our listeners know of some of the little bite-sized podcasts that Jo and I have got coming up. We have got one on using manners and etiquette, and whether that is something that's important, and how you would integrate that if you wanted to, because I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier in the podcast. We also are going to be recording one on conformity and rebellion in parenting and in dog behavior. Oh yes, Jo's pulling a that's going to be a good one face. It is going to be a good one, because I think you and I may come at it from different perspectives, so that could be quite fun. And then we're also going to do one on positive reinforcement, which is a massive thing in the dog world, but where does it lie in the parenting world, I wonder? Let's talk about that in another podcast. And then we're also going to do a podcast on listening and a podcast on patience, and how that does or doesn't fit into parenting, and how that relates to the dog behavior world. But that is coming up in our upcoming chunky bite size. See, I still can't get that. I still can't decide what I'm calling it. Chunky bite size we're going to go for. For some reason, chunky reminds me of there was an advert for something. I have no idea. I think it was a chocolate bar that went hunky chunky almonds. Do you remember it?
I do, yeah.
But I can't remember what chocolate bar it's for. But I'm sure. But anyone listening, please come on our Facebook group and tell me what that advert was for, because it really annoys me. And just that one line has stuck with me for the last 30 years. And I have no idea what chocolate bar it was. It was probably like a marathon, which is now no longer called a marathon, but it's called a Snickers. But it's probably that hunky chunky almonds. I feel like they've got almonds in. Anyway, I'm drifting. So top tips for incorporating play into parenting, or why it's important. I'm going to go for play-based learning. So this is something like if you get your ducks in a row, you can get certain play-based activities that you can then repeat and cycle day after day after day. So it takes a bit of planning to begin with, but it makes your home ed journey so much easier. For example, we had a board game, where you had to answer a question, and it was like, if you get this question right, you have to go like 6 places along the board, and then you would land on the board, and it'd be like, go back 3, go on 2, skip a turn, those kind of things. But the questions I would make up. So the good thing about that game was that it was perfect for all ages. So when they were very little, the questions might be, what is 2 + 3? And then if they flipped it over, if they got the answer right, then it had a little number at the top, and they would go forward that number of spaces. But when they got older, it was things like, the equation for photosynthesis. And you can really adapt it. So once you'd made the board, which I made from like hobbycraft stuff, we took it around the world with us for years, because it was a really useful play-based game. And the same thing with 12-sided dice is a great investment, because once you've got your 12-sided dice, you can use it for maths, you can use it for English, you can use it for anything that children love dice. They just love throwing dice. So anything at all, you can incorporate that into your learning journey. So that would be my top tip, is plan play-based games that you can incorporate into your learning for the next few years. Okay, Jo, hit me with your top tip.
Mine is a little less organized than that. Mine is incorporate it into everyday life. So don't, for me, I can't do big planning things like that. I put too much pressure on myself, and then I'm like, oh, we haven't
took
done
your
that.
children to an airport for like a year in preparation for your holiday. Don't tell me you can't plan.
Plan it in as such. I'm going like, right, okay, we're going to do this, and I need to do some prep work, and I don't know, maybe all the creative stuff really puts me off because I'm so not creative in terms of like an arts and crafts thing. So for me, I do the same as I do with the dogs, I do with the kids. I just incorporate it into every day. So like if I'm making a cup of tea, I love cup of tea training. I'll be like, right, dogs, I've counted some treats out for you, and I'm going to do stuff with you. I'll get the kids involved. I'm like, kids, how many treats have we got here? 1, 2, and we just count. So there's a little bit of math. Things like help me put the tea bag in the cup. What have we done? Labeling the skills, like I say, as we go through, but just incorporating it into your everyday so you don't feel that you are having to do anything additional. And I think I can't remember which podcast we've mentioned it on now, but there's definitely been one where we've said the more you do it, the more natural it feels, and you'll just naturally start to do it as you just go through life. Like I love car learning. We'll just listen to something or we'll see something and then it sparks off a conversation. He saw a dead badger the other day, and then we went on a whole wildlife conversation, and he wanted to talk about badgers, and now he wants to go and see badgers. So we're looking at going camping at a badger set. But all that stuff, like to me, that's everyday learning, and it's something that for me is easier than building a hobby craft game because I can't do it. I just can't do it.
That is so home-ed that you see a dead badger and now you've got a whole project based on badgers. I love that. And actually, the podcast that Jo was referring to there was the importance of relationship, where we were talking about how the more you do something, the more it becomes your sort of natural default as a parent. And I think what you said there about the importance of labeling the skills you're learning when they're playing is really important, not just for the child, but for you as a parent, particularly as a home-ed parent, because it can enable you to see, oh, we learned this today. These are the things we did today. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you get well-meaning family and friends who are like, home ed, what do you even do? Like, oh, homeschooling, that sounds like a dod. Or what do you like? Do you actually learn anything? And you could be like, well, actually, yes, we did this, this, and this today. Because you've labeled the skills when you were playing, you're more aware of them. And it also helps realistically when you're doing reports for the LA, because you then have an awareness of the skills that you've been teaching your children through play, or more importantly, that they've been learning sort of naturally through play. Well, thank you so much, Jo. It has been a very interesting podcast on play. This has been quite a big bite-sized chunk because I think this was nearer 25 minutes. So we'll have to see what our next one is. What do you fancy doing next for our next podcast, Jo?
I can't remember what was on your list. They all sounded amazing.
Shall we go for manners and etiquette and then conformity and rebellion? Because I feel like they're like feisty ones. Should we go for those?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go for that. Okay, so stay tuned for our next bite-sized chunk of home education, parenting meets dog behaviorism. And thank you, Jo, for coming on the podcast today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.